Someone is quietly unraveling because of a moment that lasted less than 10 seconds. Right now, somewhere, he cannot stop replaying it. The moment he saw you with someone else and felt something move through him that he was not prepared to feel in front of anyone. And it is entirely because of what you did without even trying. You simply existed in a moment that was never built around him, and it pulled something to the surface he has spent a long time keeping buried. This message did not find you by accident. Some part of you has likely already sensed that his reaction in that moment was not nothing. He is struggling right now because of you, because of what he saw, and because of what it forced him to feel in front of people he never wanted to feel it in front of. What you are about to hear will permanently change how you understand that moment and what it actually revealed about him. Welcome back to Carl Jung Psychology. It probably did not look like much from the outside. A room full of people. You laughing at something someone else said, standing a little too close to a man who was not him. And him, a few feet away, holding a drink he stopped actually drinking, watching something he was not supposed to be watching this closely. His face likely did not change much. Men like this tend to be good at that, keeping the surface calm even when something underneath has started moving fast. But if you had been watching closely, really closely, you might have caught it. The way his jaw set just slightly. The way his eyes returned to you more than they needed to. The way his sentences for the rest of the night got a little shorter, a little more distracted, as if part of his attention had simply left the conversation he was supposed to be having. There is another version of this same moment that happens far more quietly, without any room or any party involved at all. The version that plays out entirely through a phone screen. You post something completely ordinary, a photo from a weekend, someone tagged beside you who means nothing more than a friend catching up. Within an hour, sometimes less, you may notice he has gone unusually quiet. Not cold exactly, just absent in a way that does not match his normal rhythm of replying to you. When he does eventually respond, it tends to be shorter than usual, slightly delayed, missing whatever warmth he normally carries. He will almost certainly not mention the photo directly. He may not even be fully conscious that the photo is the reason for the shift. But something about the timing tends to give it away. The quiet, more often than not, follows shortly after he has clearly already seen it. This is not a story about jealousy in the way people usually mean that word. This is a story about what happens when a man is confronted, suddenly and without warning, with something he has been avoiding looking at directly, and what his mind does with that discomfort in the seconds that follow. If you are still watching this, you are already part of the rare few who are willing to face what most people spend their entire lives running from. 97% of people scroll past content like this, not because it does not reach them, but because it reaches them too deeply. If this is already moving something inside you, subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology right now and turn on notifications. What you are about to hear does not just explain what actually happened in his mind during that moment. It will permanently change how you see yourself and how you read the reactions of the people who matter most. Carl Jung spent a significant part of his work studying a mechanism the mind uses almost automatically, often without the person noticing it is even happening. He called it projection, the tendency to take a feeling we are not ready to own and place it onto someone or something outside of ourselves instead. It is one of the psyche's oldest defense strategies. Rather than sitting with an uncomfortable truth about our own fear or inadequacy, the unconscious finds it far easier to redirect that discomfort outward, attaching it to another person where it can be examined, judged, even criticized, without ever having to be claimed as our own. This is almost certainly what happened in him that night, in some form. Watching you with someone else did not just trigger jealousy in the simple, surface sense most people imagine. It triggered something closer to a confrontation, sudden, unwelcome glimpse of how much you actually mean to him, surfacing at a moment he had absolutely no control over. And because admitting that directly would have required a level of vulnerability he may not be used to offering, especially not in a crowded room, his mind likely did what minds like his tend to do. It found somewhere else to put the feeling. Maybe it showed up later that night as an oddly specific comment about the other man, something a little too pointed to be casual, a critique that did not quite match the size of the moment that prompted it. Maybe he said something like the guy seemed full of himself, or that he did not seem like your type, or some other small, slightly defensive observation that, on its own, would seem like nothing. But these comments are rarely about the other man at all. They tend to be projection in its most literal form. Fear of inadequacy, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, redirected outward and reframed as judgment of someone else. Because judging someone else is so much safer than admitting what the moment actually exposed in him. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. The intensity of a projection like this tends to correlate directly with the size of the feeling underneath it. A man who genuinely did not care would not need to find anything wrong with the other guy. Indifference does not require justification. It is only when something real is at stake, when losing you is suddenly a possibility his mind cannot fully tolerate sitting with, that the psyche reaches for projection as a way of managing what otherwise feels unmanageable. In other words, the sharper his reaction, the more specific his criticism, the more unnecessary his commentary about a man he barely knows, the more it tends to suggest that what he actually felt watching you was fear, not indifference. Picture this more concretely, because it is worth seeing clearly rather than as an abstract idea. Maybe it was not even a party. Maybe it was something smaller. A photo you posted, you and a friend. Nothing remotely romantic about it, and yet he liked it a little too fast, or did not like it at all, or sent a message 20 minutes later that had nothing to do with the photo, but somehow still felt slightly off in tone. Maybe it was a mutual friend mentioning, in passing, that someone had been asking about you, and watching his face shift almost imperceptibly before he changed the subject to something unrelated, a little too quickly. These moments are small. They are easy to miss if you are not paying attention to anything beneath the surface. but they tend to be remarkably consistent in what they reveal. A man managing a feeling he has not yet decided he is allowed to have. It is worth noting that the intensity of this reaction tends to vary depending on who the other man actually is, and that variation itself carries information. A stranger at a party, someone he will likely never see again, tends to produce the mildest version of this pattern, a flicker of discomfort that fades relatively quickly once the moment passes. A close male friend of yours, someone with an established place in your life, tends to produce something more sustained because his unconscious cannot file that person away as irrelevant. The friend is a recurring presence, which means the projection has more material to attach itself to over time. And an ex, someone with actual history attached to you, tends to produce the strongest reaction of all, often disproportionate to anything currently happening, because the unconscious is no longer responding only to the present moment. It is responding to an entire narrative about whether he was ever truly chosen over what came before him. None of these reactions are about you doing anything wrong. They are simply different doors into the same underlying fear, opened by different keys. This is where it gets genuinely complicated, because projection like this does not happen in a vacuum. It tends to draw on material that already exists somewhere underneath his usual composure. Older fears about being replaceable, about not being chosen, about caring more than he is met with in return. Watching you with someone else, even in the most harmless context, can momentarily collapse the emotional distance he normally maintains, putting him face to face with exactly the kind of vulnerability he has likely spent years learning to avoid. The other man in that moment becomes almost incidental. He is simply the surface onto which an old, unresolved fear gets temporarily projected, because confronting the fear directly, admitting, even just to himself, how much losing you would actually cost him, is a far harder thing to do. And here is the part almost nobody talks about. This pattern, uncomfortable as it can be to witness, is actually one of the more reliable indicators of real feeling available to you, precisely because it is involuntary. A man can control what he says. He can choose his words carefully, manage his tone, perform calm even when he does not feel it. What he generally cannot control nearly as well is this kind of reflexive, almost automatic redirection of feeling. The small criticism that slips out before he has had time to edit it. The subtle shift in mood that follows seeing you with someone else. The brief flicker of something unguarded before his usual composure reasserts itself. These moments tend to bypass the parts of him that are good at managing impressions, because they emerge from somewhere underneath that management entirely. It is worth asking, honestly, where a reaction like this tends to come from in the first place, because it rarely starts with you. Jung would likely point toward something earlier, a moment, possibly long before you, where being chosen was not guaranteed, where someone he cared about turned their attention elsewhere, and it cost him more than he ever fully processed. Maybe it was a relationship that ended without warning. Maybe it goes back further than that, to something learned in childhood about what happens when you let yourself depend on someone too completely. Whatever the origin, the unconscious tends to hold on to these moments with remarkable precision, and it does not need much to reactivate them. Sometimes, nothing more than watching you laugh at something another man said in a room that had nothing to do with him at all. This tends to connect to something larger about how he learned to attach to people in the first place, long before you were ever part of his life. A man who learned early that affection could disappear without warning, that being needed was safer than needing, often carries a quiet hypervigilance into every connection that starts to matter. A low-grade scanning for signs that the same disappearance might be coming again. Around you specifically, this hypervigilance tends to stay mostly dormant during ordinary, stable moments, because nothing in those moments resembles the original wound closely enough to trigger it. But the instant a scenario appears that even loosely echoes that old pattern, attention briefly elsewhere, someone else temporarily occupying space he has quietly come to think of as his, the old alarm tends to fire before his conscious mind has any say in the matter. This is rarely about you specifically, as much as it is about an old system doing exactly what it was built to do, reacting to a present moment as though it were the past repeating itself. There is a meaningful difference, Jung would say, between projection that stays unconscious indefinitely and projection that eventually gets recognized for what it is. Jung was clear that the goal of psychological growth was never to stop projecting altogether. That tends to be nearly impossible for anyone, but to gradually develop the capacity to notice when it is happening and to slowly reclaim the feeling that was being placed outside of oneself. For your man, this tends to look like a specific kind of internal shift, one that often takes time and repeated exposure to the same triggering pattern before it actually occurs. Early on, expect the projection to stay relatively unconscious. He sees you with someone else. Something tightens in him, and it comes out sideways, as criticism, as distance, as an oddly flat mood he cannot quite explain even to himself. He likely does not yet have the language or the willingness to say plainly that the moment scared him. This is not a character flaw. It tends to simply be where he is in the process, and pushing him to name it before he is ready rarely accelerates anything. If anything, direct confrontation in these early moments tends to make the projection more rigid, because it forces him to defend a position rather than gently examine where the discomfort actually came from. This is where most people give up too early, misreading the early, defensive version of this pattern as proof that he does not feel enough to bother working through it. But Jung's framework would suggest the opposite is closer to the truth. A man who did not feel much would have very little material for his unconscious to project in the first place. The presence of projection, however clumsy or indirect, tends to indicate the presence of feeling underneath it. Feeling that simply has not yet found a more direct way to express itself. Stay with this, because what follows is the part most people never reach. Over time, if the same pattern keeps repeating, if he keeps encountering moments where you are simply living your life, talking to other people, existing outside of his immediate orbit, and his projection keeps getting triggered in roughly the same way, something tends to start happening underneath the surface. The repetition itself becomes data. Some part of him begins to notice, even if only vaguely at first, that his reaction is disproportionate to what is actually occurring. You laughing with a coworker is not, objectively, a threat, and yet something in him keeps responding as though it might be. This growing awareness of the gap between the actual situation and his internal response tends to be the beginning of real psychological movement. The first quiet signs that the projection is starting to be recognized, rather than simply acted out. What this can look like, practically, is a shift in how he talks about these moments after they happen. Where he once might have made an indirect comment about the other person, he may eventually say something closer to the truth, even if it is still slightly guarded. Something like admitting, almost reluctantly, that he is not sure why it bothered him, or that he knows it should not have mattered as much as it did. This kind of admission, however small, tends to represent something genuinely significant. It is the beginning of him reclaiming the feeling he previously could only express by redirecting it elsewhere. If this is already moving something inside you, subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology and turn on notifications, because what comes next, what it actually looks like when a man begins owning this kind of fear directly instead of projecting it outward, tends to be the part that explains where this connection is actually headed. Drop 528 in the comments if this found you at exactly the right moment. Let's go a layer deeper into why this particular trigger, seeing you with someone else, tends to hit so much harder than almost any other moment in a developing connection. There is a reason jealousy, even mild, even brief, tends to surface feelings with unusual speed and intensity compared to other emotional cues. Jung would likely point to the fact that scarcity and threat activate older, more primitive layers of the psyche than calm, secure moments do. When everything feels stable, a man like this can comfortably maintain whatever emotional distance he has built for himself. It costs him very little to stay composed when nothing is challenging that composure. But the sudden possibility of loss, even an imagined or exaggerated one, tends to short-circuit that comfortable distance almost instantly, forcing buried material to the surface faster than weeks of calm, steady connection ever could. This is part of why these jealousy-adjacent moments, uncomfortable as they can be to witness, often reveal more accurate information about how he feels than almost anything he might tell you directly during a calm conversation. Calm conversation gives him time to choose his words, manage his tone, perform whatever version of himself he has decided is appropriate to show you. A sudden, unexpected threat to losing you gives him no such runway. What surfaces in that gap, the tightened jaw, the oddly specific criticism, the brief withdrawal that follows, tends to be closer to the unfiltered truth than almost anything else available to you. This is where it gets genuinely complicated, because it raises an important question worth sitting with honestly. What is the difference between a man whose projection is gradually moving toward integration and a man whose jealousy is simply possessiveness dressed up in psychological language? This distinction matters, and it deserves a direct answer rather than a comfortable one. The difference tends to show up in what follows the reaction, not in the reaction itself. A man moving toward integration, even while still projecting in the moment, generally does not try to control your behavior, restrict who you spend time with, or punish you for moments that triggered his fear. His discomfort stays primarily internal, even if it leaks out sideways as an offhand comment. A man whose pattern is closer to possessiveness, by contrast, tends to escalate. Guilt-tripping, monitoring, attempting to limit your life in order to manage his own discomfort, rather than doing the harder work of examining where that discomfort actually originates. Recognizing this difference is not optional. It is one of the more important pieces of clarity Jung's framework can offer you here, because patience is warranted for one of these patterns, and firm boundaries are warranted for the other. It helps to know what each pattern actually sounds like in practice, because the line between them is not always obvious in the moment. A man whose discomfort stays internal might say something like admitting, almost involuntarily, that he is not sure why he reacted that way, or making a slightly too pointed joke that he drops as soon as you notice it landed wrong. A man drifting toward possessiveness, by contrast, tends to sound different, asking who someone is in a tone that expects an account rather than simple curiosity, suggesting you should not spend time with a particular person, or bringing the moment back up days later as evidence in an argument that has nothing to do with it. The first pattern is discomfort he is carrying alone, however imperfectly. The second is discomfort he is attempting to manage by controlling you instead of himself, and that distinction is not a small one. Assuming what you are observing falls into the first category, internal discomfort rather than external control, there is a particular moment worth watching for, something close to what we might call an integration test. This tends to arrive the next time a similar situation occurs, after the first instance has already happened and had time to settle. The test is simple, though rarely framed that way in the moment. Does the same trigger produce the same unconscious reaction, unexamined and projected outward as before? Or does something different happen? A flicker of self-awareness, a slightly more honest reaction, evidence that the previous experience actually taught him something about himself, rather than simply repeating itself unchanged. If you track this pattern across enough instances, rather than judging it from a single moment, you will likely notice something worth paying attention to. The reaction tends not to disappear all at once. It tends to shrink gradually, the cold mood lasting an evening instead of a weekend, the pointed comment about the other man arriving less often and sounding less sharp when it does, the recovery back to his normal warmth happening faster each time it occurs. This gradual shortening is itself meaningful data, even when no single instance looks like dramatic progress on its own. Growth in a pattern this old rarely arrives as a single transformative conversation. It tends to arrive in inches, visible only when you are willing to compare the whole arc rather than measuring each individual moment against some imagined finish line. This is where most people misjudge what they are looking for. They wait for the reaction to disappear entirely, as if real growth means he stops feeling jealous altogether. That is rarely how this actually works, and expecting it tends to set up disappointment for no good reason. Real movement looks less like the absence of feeling and more like a changing relationship to the feeling. He may still notice the tightness in his chest when he sees you talking to someone else, but he increasingly catches himself before it turns into an unfair comment, or He names what he is actually feeling instead of disguising it as commentary about another person entirely. But what happens next changes everything for the people who give this enough time to actually unfold. Because a man who reaches this stage, who can recognize his own projection in real time, even imperfectly, even with visible effort, tends to become a fundamentally different kind of partner than the version of him still operating purely on unconscious defense. The energy that once went into managing and disguising his fear starts becoming available for something else entirely. Honesty, mostly. The capacity to simply say, in a moment that once would have produced only sideways criticism, something closer to the truth. That seeing you with someone else, even harmlessly, reminded him uncomfortably of how much you actually matter to him. This is where it gets genuinely complicated one more time, because there is a real possibility worth naming honestly. Some men stay in the unconscious version of this pattern indefinitely, never quite developing the self-awareness required to recognize their own projection for what it is. This does not necessarily mean the underlying feeling was never real. It tends to mean that feeling, on its own, is not always sufficient. Psychological insight requires a willingness to look inward that not everyone has fully developed, regardless of how much they may actually care. You are not responsible for generating that willingness in him. You can be patient. You can be consistent. But the work of recognizing and reclaiming a projection is ultimately his to do, on his own timeline, whether or not that timeline matches what you would prefer. If you have made it this far, you already understand something most people never take the time to learn: that a man's harshest, most defensive reactions are sometimes the clearest evidence of how much he actually feels, even when those reactions look nothing like affection on the surface. Subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology if this is already reshaping how you read these moments. Because what we are about to cover next, what it looks like when this entire pattern finally resolves, tends to be the part people remember longest. Drop 11 in the comments if you already know exactly who came to mind while watching this. There is one more layer worth sitting with before we close, because it brings this back to where it ultimately belongs, with you and with what your own response in these moments is actually capable of doing. It can be tempting, watching a man go through something like this, to react to the surface behavior rather than what is underneath it. The sideways comment about the other man, the sudden shift in mood, the brief coldness that follows a moment that should have meant nothing. These can sting if you take them at face value, as though they were simply about jealousy or control. But Jung's framework offers something more useful than taking offense. It offers the possibility of recognizing what is actually happening and responding to that instead of the defensive surface covering it. It is also worth sitting with what it says about you, that you are capable of seeing past the sideways comment to whatever it might actually be protecting. That kind of patience tends to require its own form of self-awareness. The willingness to separate someone's defended reaction from their underlying feeling, rather than simply absorbing the reaction at face value and walking away. Not everyone has built that capacity. If you find yourself instinctively looking for what is underneath, rather than reacting only to what is on the surface, that tends to say something meaningful about your own depth, whether or not you have ever framed it to yourself in those terms. This does not mean excusing behavior that crosses into actual control or punishment. That distinction, covered earlier, still matters and should never be ignored. But for the more ordinary version of this pattern, the small, mostly internal discomfort that occasionally leaks out as an offhand comment, your response can matter more than you might expect. Reacting with defensiveness of your own, matching his projection with one of your own, tends to escalate the entire exchange into something neither of you intended. Staying calm, neither minimizing what you noticed, nor making more of it than it actually was, tends to do something quieter and more effective. It gives him room to eventually recognize the pattern himself, without having to do it under pressure or in the middle of a fight. So here is where this leaves you. Somewhere, he is likely still replaying that moment in some form. The version of himself that briefly showed through when he saw you with someone else. The reaction he may not have fully understood even as it was happening. You do not need to confront that moment directly, or demand he explain himself, or extract an admission he is not yet ready to offer. What tends to matter more is simply continuing to be yourself, consistently, while paying attention to whether the pattern shifts over time, whether the next instance produces a little more self-awareness than the last, whether the sideways comments slowly give way to something closer to honesty. If this video reached you tonight, it likely was not by accident. Subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology because we cover this kind of psychological depth every single week. The unconscious patterns behind jealousy, fear, distance, and the connections that confuse people the most until they finally understand what was actually happening underneath. There is a full library of this work waiting for you, each video built to help you read the people in your life with more clarity than most people will ever have access to. Drop 520 in the comments if you feel like this connection is still very much alive, even in the moments it does not look like it. He could not hide what he felt. He just had not yet found the courage to say it plainly.